Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.
You know, you're struck by that immediately because you don't often get to hear Tony Rice so unadorned. You often hear the effect of Tony Rice. In most of his recorded output, he's playing with a band, and you know what a lot of people are so blown away by with Tony is how he could affect and shape the music going on around him. It's not just him taking great guitar solos. It's just that everybody played their best when they played with Tony.
Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, a podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. This week is a bite-sized episode, and it's going to be Chris Eldridge from Punch Brothers and Mighty Poplar chatting about Tony Rice, and specifically about his album Church Street Blues. A couple of years ago, I put out about 5 hours of content about that record to celebrate the 40th anniversary, and this comes from that. I've been listening back to a lot of the older stuff. We're nearing on the 500th episode of the podcast now. And I've been going through the old episodes for all sorts of reasons, but just in doing so, I've just listened to this bit of conversation with Chris again, and I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to put it out. A lot of people have missed the Tony stuff, more recent listeners. Also, just within 5 hours of content, stuff gets buried, and I wanted to pull a little bit out and just celebrate it. We're chatting about that record, about how brilliant it is, also about kind of the opportunity it gives you to hear what Tony's doing, and Chris is really perceptive about that. I love hearing Chris talk about, pretty much anything, but particularly Tony. He spent some time with him. He kind of has some insights and some thoughts, and it's just interesting stuff. And I was delighted to get to have this conversation. We also chat a little bit about why Chris thinks this is a good record to listen to on vinyl. And at the time, you could only get it sort of secondhand on eBay, original pressings. It was very expensive. Since then, Craft Recordings reissued it on vinyl. Remastered from the original tapes, so that is out there now. But yes, I just wanted to put this out and celebrate a little bit of content that I did sort of 2.5 years ago and might have got a bit buried amongst the endless episodes. Really hope you enjoy this. I very much enjoyed this. There's some more cool stuff to come, and I will, of course, tell you about those in due course. But for now, this is the episode celebrating Tony Rice with Chris Eldridge. If you want to support Bluegrass Jam Along, you can, of course, do that. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts for a tiny amount of money every month. You can follow the link in the show notes that explains how to do that in the support the show link, or you can just tell your friends about this episode. That's the most important thing, really, amongst all the rest of it. Just recommending this podcast to people who you think might like it. BluegrassJamAlong.com for more info, links to social platforms, lists of all the episodes, all that kind of stuff. In the meantime, enjoy this, have a great week, and happy picking.
I don't remember talking to him about that record very much. What I remember talking to him about was that he had the idea that he wanted to do the record, and he was on Rounder at the time, and Rounder didn't think that he should do that. You know, he was kind of making his instrumental Spacegrass records then, and they just had a different ideas about what he was going to do. And I presume Tony was fully under contract, but this is where Tony just had such a maverick. Tony was going to do what Tony was going to do. And so he was like, all right, sure, don't put it out. And he just went to Sugar Hill and called them up and said, I want to make this record. Basically, Tony was like, nobody is going to tell me what kind of music I'm going to make. So for whatever reason, he arrived at this point where he wanted to make that record at that time. And it was almost, from a business side, I think it was almost defiant in how he did it. He was just going to do what he was going to do, which says something about Tony for sure. I also know that was a very difficult record for him to make. I think being so exposed so naked, you know, and having to create the whole musical picture was something that he had to work on a lot. But he sure did succeed. You know, as you listen to that record, I popped it on and just skipped around a little bit this morning, just because I knew we were going to be talking, just because it had been a little while since I listened to it, and I was struck. I was just struck with how big a lot of the gestures are on that record. You know, we can. It's so easy to, you know, fixate on how accurate and precise Tony is, and how complex, you know, the lines are that he plays on the guitar. You know, think about the song Church Street Blues and that. You know, it's really syncopated. There are all these crazy things going on. But I think if you listen to Church Street Blues, you can also really hear how zoomed out he was. Like, you can hear these really big phrases. You hear that he wasn't just operating in this really zoomed in microscopic way. You can really hear. I think it's kind of a masterclass, if you choose to look for this stuff, in rendering music and having a big picture, you know, holding both a big picture in mind and kind of a focused, you know, more microscopic picture. I think that's probably, when, you know, he said it was hard. I think that's probably what he was working on, was how do you get not just the guitar playing to sound awesome and the singing to sound awesome, but how do you get like a whole musical world to come through, and that has dimensionality to it. Because I think that's why Church Street Blues is such a masterpiece. I mean, as a fan of Tony Rice's, you can study it and just try and learn about how he was doing what he was doing, which is something I'll always be fascinated by. But it's this record that just stands up as a good record to listen to. And I think if you kind of start asking yourself why or how that's happening, I think it's, you know, I think it's because he had a bigger perspective. You know, there's a lot of the wisdom of Tony. Tony was such a wise guy, wise musician. This is something that kind of I was so struck by in my time with him. My big takeaway was how wise he was, not how good or talented or anything like that. My big takeaway was always how wise he was. He's like, you know, a sage who was like sitting on top of the mountain. And we talked a lot from that perspective. He talked to me a lot from that perspective, as the guy, like, you know, sitting on top of the mountain. And there was a lot of asking questions about the big picture. So he was very concerned with that sort of thing. And I think the Church Street Blues is a fascinating listen with that in mind.
And it's really interesting that, as you're describing that, it's almost like I get a similar sense if I stand in front of one of those big bits of street art that takes up the entire side of a building, but is incredibly detailed. And you think, when you're painting like a square foot of that, how do you know what it looks like from 30 feet back? And how are the proportions going to be right? And how are the lines going to settle, not just across a phrase or a verse or a song, but a whole record and a whole musical kind of intent across 40 minutes of, you know. And it has that. It hangs together as an album. It begs to be listened to together.
Exactly. I wonder about that often in that exact same way. I see, you know, in Nashville, there's some murals, like some big murals, and they're so beautiful and detailed. It's like how are these guys doing? How are they operating on both levels? And I mean, I can't. I'm the world's worst visual artist, so that truly boggles my mind. But you know, I think it's probably the same as music. You just kind of have to remember to do that. That's part of the task. You know, as you practice the songs, you record them and you go back and listen to them, and you see, is it coming through? You just try and keep that bigger perspective in mind. I mean, even I was listening to, what song was it? It's Last Thing on My Mind. Earlier today, I just kind of dropped the needle on that one, and I was just struck with how big the beats were. Like they're these kind of big phrases in how he's playing it on guitar. You hear these in the guitar playing, like, or just the big musical phrases wind up being a lot bigger. There's so much little stuff happening in there. But the big phrases kind of have these beautiful turns in them as well. It's really cool. It's just so easy to lose sight of that. I mean, I think that's kind of what I mean about the wisdom. Tony was so wise, and I think if you listen to some of this music with that in mind, you can kind of hear that he was remembering the big picture.
Yeah, and when you're responsible for singing and playing the guitar and nobody else is doing anything, and the arrangements are as complicated as Church Street Blues or whatever in terms of technical stuff that's going on, to be zoomed out enough to trust all that's going to happen and still deliver a performance is like, that's, about as good as it gets.
Yeah. But I mean, I think with any of that stuff, you kind of just work on it. You keep working on it, and then you keep working on it. And at a certain point, you just turn it over and you just trust that it's going to be there. It's mysterious and it's not mysterious all at the same time. It's like you can marvel at somebody doing that, but I feel like anybody who's accomplished great things like that, for me as a practitioner, it's always fun to just remember that, like, well, these guys got there by just doing the work. There's no other way. Like, as much as I revere Tony, for instance, he also showed up to where he was by just working really hard and just loving it so much, staying so committed and keeping, orienting his priorities and his interests around that, making sure he could be that guy who could spend that time on that stuff.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. That's another, yeah.
I was watching some tennis last year, and Roger Federer was playing, and the commentator basically said, like, he makes this thing look effortless, but you have no idea how much effort goes into making something look that effortless. It's like, it's the hours and hours and hours of hitting the same shot over and over again. And, but as an outsider who can't do that, it looks like some sort of magic. And I guess the magic is being the kind of creative mind that decides to do it in the first place. That's the magic. And the rest of it is just teaching your body to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you go far enough in one direction, you end up in the other.
That's right. That's totally right.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because it's one of the words that's cropped up quite a lot when people talk about Church Street Blues has been the word intimate, because it is a very intimate listening experience, because you're just hearing Tony and you're hearing all the like little inner workings of what goes on. But also that, what you say about the bigger phrases and the bigger arc of it, and like, it's really interesting that it has both of those facets. It's intimate and broad at the same time.
Yeah, well, I feel like the big picture is only something I've come to appreciate recently. Like, I feel like the intimate thing, I've always, you're struck by that immediately, because you don't often get to hear Tony Rice so unadorned. You often hear the effect of Tony Rice. In most of his recorded output, he's playing with a band, and what a lot of people are so blown away by with Tony is how he could affect and shape the music going on around him. It's not just him taking great guitar solos. It's just that everybody played their best when they played with Tony. The music that he was a part of, like when the music he was a part of was hitting its stride. All music hits its stride, whatever it is. But when Tony was around and the music hit its stride, it really is like legendary stuff. It feels monumental in those moments. And so, looking at that, it's like you feel the effect of Tony. But it's often hard in those things to kind of listen through and actually hear. You say, like, how's he doing that? You can't always hear the nuances of how his guitar is interacting with the band. Sometimes you can, and it's fun to listen to any kind of band record with him with that in mind. I mean, but on Church Street Blues, it's like this amazing example. It's like everybody's like, oh, okay, finally I'm going to get to hear like how he's doing it all. And it really is cool to hear him play rhythm guitar on there and hear how little he's actually playing, so much of the time. There's not a lot of strumming on that record. There are a lot of kind of bass lines that dance and little phrases that'll dance kind of, but it's always in dialogue with the vocal. It's not just like don jaga don jaga don jaga don. It's you kind of get this interesting inner look that you just can't see, this view you can't usually see of kind of the relationship between his singing and the songs and his guitar playing. That's just so fascinating.
Mm. And that thing you talk about the like playing very little and almost just playing bass lines at points, and it's a bit more like a jazz approach to playing a drum kit than a rock approach to playing a kit, where like with jazz you've got the ride cymbal and the hi-hat going all the time, and then everything else comes in between phrases to comment or accent. Or it's like, the strums with Tony are often only there between phrases. There's like a little bit of punctuation, or it's not there all the time. He's not driving his way through all of it. And it's great to be able to just hear that sometimes and notice it.
Totally.
It's there, but when you listen to a 5-piece band where everybody's playing incredibly, some of that goes under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's the Tony Rice Jedi mind trick. He trusted his listeners to kind of fill in some of the gaps. He didn't feel like he needed to show you where every single thing was. Like there was a thread he was connected to that thread. He stayed connected to it, didn't need to spell it all out for you. And he did that in such a powerful, committed way that you as the listener find that thread too, without even realizing you're doing it. And you can fill in the gaps. You don't need him to hit every single subdivision. You don't need him to hit every single strum. It is interesting. I mean, I love I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think it's pretty apt, the comparison between like rock and roll, which is, in the most beautiful way, because I love rock and roll, just so boneheaded. It's like, you're going to, like the rhythm's going to kind of hit you there. Dugga, 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 dugga. Yeah. Versus the jazz thing where it just floats and everybody's kind of in this land of, where, I don't know, it's like you're on the ocean or something. It's just all a little bit suspended, but you're moving forward.
And then we also talked briefly about how Chris came to know this record and like some really interesting thoughts he's got about listening to it on different formats. Here's Chris chatting about a really interesting topic, actually, why some stuff sounds better on vinyl and why actually he thinks some stuff doesn't.
Yeah, I'm an 82 model myself, but that record was definitely in my house a lot. My mom is, the world's biggest Tony Rice fan. She just loved that music so much and loved Tony's thing so much, like a lot of people. She's not a flat picker. Tony his heart was there. And so that was a record we definitely listened to when I was a kid. It's interesting. I'd encourage people to find it on vinyl and try and listen to it and all of Tony's records. Find it on vinyl. It sounds so much better than the digital transfers. There's a lot of music that sounds better on digital. I feel like the vast majority of music made today, if it's recorded digitally, it's almost always going to sound better digitally. I certainly feel that way about all the music I've ever made that's gone on a record. It's like the digital copy sounds better. But with music that was recorded back in the day, it's the opposite. It's like to hear this stuff on vinyl is really the way it's meant to be heard. So for anybody out there who's got a turntable, and I mean, gosh, at this point, $100 to spend on eBay. Yeah, I guess I'm saying that, and it's realizing like it's hard to find those things now, but it really is worth hearing on vinyl.
I don't know if it was you who said this, but I remember somebody telling me at some point that that Tony would urge people to find the vinyl as well because he wasn't particularly happy with some of the transfers to CD, that he didn't think they'd be done particularly thoughtfully.
I didn't realize that I just grew up listening to the CDs. Well, I guess I had some tapes when I was a kid. I had like Me and My Guitar on cassette. I remember, but yeah, like when I was kind of getting into it, I had all this stuff on CD, and it was actually when I was down at his house. He was like, "Have you ever heard this stuff on vinyl?" He wasn't a big fan of playing his own music. He wasn't like there to toot his own horn, but I think he did want me to know about that. So I remember he put on acoustics. He pulled out his record acoustics and put that on the vinyl. And it was like, and I knew that record inside and out. I mean, I knew every note that everybody played on it. I'd listened to it a lot, and it was like hearing it for the first time. Hearing it on vinyl. He also had a great system, but that was it was interesting. I know I may have told you this little story before, but apparently when they heard the digital, he and Billy Wolf heard the digital, master of "Cold on the Shoulder." They was so bad to their ears that they laughed. They weren't even upset. They were just like, it was so far off of what they had intended it to be and what it was kind of on the vinyl, just really thin. And so yeah, for people who haven't heard like the original versions as they actually made them and oversaw them, because they didn't oversee, with a couple of rare exceptions where Billy remastered some of that stuff, they didn't oversee any of the digital transfers. It was just Rounder sent it all off to I think there was some mastering house in Japan that just kind of they'd send them off and they just kind of process these things. And that's what we all grew up with, and which is great. It doesn't take anything away from the music. It's just it's a beautiful experience awaiting people who haven't heard the other versions.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.